So today I want to talk about how to track the cost of AI augmented development properly. In the news recently, Uber came out and said that they'd burned through their entire year's token budget in 4 months. A couple other companies have reported similar issues. One even reported, I think it was just 2 days ago, as of the time of this recording, that they had spent, I think, $500 million on token costs because they'd unleashed Claude on their entire organization with absolutely no guardrails. And people had gone crazy and used it for everything, and they got this absolutely absurd bill at the end of the month or whatever. So we don't want that. And we want to know how to track things properly. People have tried different ways of properly tracking things. There are these LLM leaderboards companies have set up where they track how many tokens people are using to prove that they're really using it or using it enough. All of those have ended in tears. Most of them have been rescinded because they've spent a lot of money and haven't gotten any benefit from it. So let's not do that. Let's talk about ways not to do things. Do not track tokens. There's no point whatsoever in tracking the number of tokens spent. Even if you're using just, say, Anthropic. There is differences in how each model handles tokens, even between, say, Opus 4.5 and 4.6 and 4.7. They don't all work the same. The same task will use radically different numbers of tokens, 20, 30%. So even if you're tracking token spend, you change the model and all of a sudden it's a radically different number of tokens. If you're intelligently bouncing between different cost models, for instance, going between Haiku to Sonnet to Opus, those are all going to have different token usages for the same tasks. And because, say, failure rates may go up, if you're using, say, Haiku or something that's not quite as strong as you might need, then you may have to retry a task over and over again. You're not getting any value from those tokens. So to just track the number of them isn't really telling you what you need to know. So ignore tokens. What you care about is cost and you care about impact. So let's go looking at what the costs are. The cost of releasing code to production is all of the cost of the tokens, which regardless of model, just add all that up. The cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the salary or whatever, if you're paying freelancers, the cost of the people prompting the AI, evaluating its output, and all of the code that would run, say, to auto-evaluate the code that's produced first. So, for instance, if you have an LLM that produces some code, you run a linter on it, you're running a bunch of unit tests, whatever. If you're doing this in the cloud, those cloud costs have to be included too. And you need to add up all the costs for all the PRs and all the code that you generate, whether you use it or not, because those are still costs. So if you produce 100 PRs and only 4 or 5 of them get to production, the cost of those 4 or 5 is aggregated and grouped with all the 95 that's just sitting in a review queue or getting rejected. So you still have to take into account all the costs that are wasted getting things to production. Then you need to look at the things that get to production. So just because it gets to production doesn't mean it's good. There are plenty of things that get into production and then have not been properly reviewed and have to be reverted, fixed, whatever. You only care about good, durable code that actually survives in production long enough to actually see value. So I would say 2 weeks or a month. You can pick your window, but that's your target. And so what you have in the end is cost per accepted change. The cost across all the costs of generation and review and hosting and so on, divided by the number of changes that you successfully got. And those changes have to be further normalized. So it's easy to game this metric if you say release one change and it's got 20,000 lines of code, or if you do the opposite where you release tons and tons of changes but each of them is 5 lines of code. And purposely breaking it down. You don't want people to game it too much. So what I propose is you want to take any large PRs and split them at 500 lines of code boundary. And round up. So if something is under 500 lines of code, it's 1 change. If it's 1,300 lines of code, it's 3 changes. Why? Well, 1, the gaming issue. Second, people are not good at reviewing code past about 400 lines of code. There's some research on this. At around 400 lines of code, people's ability to review drops. So you actually want to keep your changes small and agile. It's just good practice anyway, but this helps you normalize and prevent gaming. And sometimes, though, changes are genuinely large. There are some unavoidable times where large changes happen, and you need to track that properly. So then you have this normalized size of change, and then you have all the aggregate costs to release those changes into production, and subtracting the successful changes that have been reverted or need fixing, and then you just have your total successful changes. Actually pretty simple. And what you get is cost per accepted change. And you can use this to steer your organization. You don't care about the cost of any one change. One small change is obviously going to cost less than, say, something pretty complicated. But in aggregate, once you get 5, 10, 20, 100 changes that are going through, this begins to normalize. The different size of these changes balances out, and you know what's appropriate for your organization. Then if you actually look at these costs and you can see the subcomponents, you can steer your organization's spend. Are you spending a lot on generation? Are you spending a lot on code reviews? A lot of times, if you actually look at token spend, the cost of doing automated code reviews is 3 or 4 or 5 times the cost of the original generation. And then are you spending a lot of time, and therefore money, on humans reviewing this code? And how much of it is wasted and rejected? Are you seeing that for every 10 PRs, only 1 actually gets to production in a given window? That tells you what's going wrong. So do that, look at the subcomponents, and track it in a dashboard for cost per accepted change. Then, once you have this cost per accepted change and you have the changes that are getting production, then your company is in a position to actually look at your return. You finally generated a bunch of PRs, they've gotten to production, they're operational, they're running safely or look safe. Was it worth it? In the end, was it worth it? With all the waste and all the cost of checking it and reviews and so on, are these changes worth it? And that can be a financial return if it's, say, a revenue generating set of features, or it could be a strategic thing, or it could just be better user experience. But you as a business owner or operator of your unit can look at these changes and look at the cost and say, was this a good investment? And you can say, how could I make this investment better? Where am I spending my time? Where am I being inefficient? What was a pain in this process? And you can see it show up in numbers. And then it's something you can take to your management, your board, whatever, and track. Are we getting more efficient? Is our cost per effective change going down, or is it going up? And if so, either way, why? What improvements do we need to make to keep driving this cost down so that we can ship more effectively and drive better business returns? So that is how you properly track your token spend and your AI spend. You use cost per accepted change. I have a website up for this, costperacceptedchange.org. It has the whole metrics, another longer description of this in text, how to instrument it, a bunch of suggested tools, and you can use that to get this started in your company. It's really just not that hard to wire up. You can also read my book, which talks about this and other AI augmented development best practices, called The Delivery Gap, which just talks about why so many organizations fail at AI and what organizations that succeed and actually get value out of it do differently from other organizations, and what you need to do to make your organization one of the ones that succeeds. So see you next time.